against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, it was rather interesting. There's been such a huge buildup toward the global climate agreement in Paris, France, and yet when it all came down, it was like it was muted with all of the terrorist attacks in France and also in San Bernardino, California, so that the news cycle actually was shifted away. And it appears that the opposition sort of got thrown off track just a little bit too. Nevertheless, President Obama was absolutely determined that he was going to get this agreement done, and he did get an agreement done. The question is, what did he get done? Now, he's claiming that the Paris Global Warming Agreement is an historic agreement that will save the world. Some people are saying that it will make no difference at all. What is the truth? And what is the true agenda behind this mysterious thing that politicians like to call now climate change? It started out global warming, global warming, global warming. All of a sudden that term has disappeared, obviously because we have no global warming. We haven't had any warming for the last 19 years now. So now they've suddenly gone to this new term, climate change. If there's no global warming, why do they keep on beating the same old drum? Well, let me first of all tell you what basically happened in Paris over the last almost 2 weeks. This article comes from the New York Times. Nations approve landmark climate accord in Paris. And that was on December the 12th of the New York Times. But the article goes on to tell us President Obama said the historic agreement is a tribute to American climate change leadership. I think he's talking about himself there when he says that this agreement is attributable to American leadership. The article tells us, with the sudden bang of a gavel, Saturday night, representatives of 195 nations reached a landmark accord that will, for the first time, commit nearly every country to lowering planet warming greenhouse gas emissions. Now notice the propaganda here. They're saying planet warming greenhouse gas emissions, and yet we have no proof that greenhouse gases cause warming. But they've beat that drum for so long, and plus they're not even calling it warming anymore, and yet they keep on trying to sell us this concept that greenhouse gas emissions are responsible for warming the planet and that it's going to create a crisis. So anyway, this agreement is supposed to help stave off the most drastic effects of climate change. Now, I want to reiterate, there is no proof that gas emissions cause global warming. You may remember Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth film, and on the film he had a graph, and he had global warming running here, and he had temperature running here. He had the lines going together, and he attempted to show that when the emissions increased, that the temperature increased. However, I downloaded that graph, looked at it very carefully, and the fact is the temperatures were going up first, and then the increased emissions followed. So exactly what he was trying to prove, he actually proved the exact opposite. So it was interesting. Nevertheless, the article goes on to say the deal, which was met with an eruption of cheers and ovations from thousands of delegates gathered around the world, represents a historic breakthrough on an issue that has foiled decades of international efforts to address climate change. There's that word again. Traditionally, such pacts have required developed economies like the United States to take action to lower greenhouse gas emissions, but they have exempted developing countries like China and India from such obligations. Now, let's pause a moment to say this. China and the United States are reportedly the world's two largest polluters. And therefore, for China to be on the sidelines, if any of this were true, just simply is not going to work in solving the problem. The article goes on to say, the accord, which United Nations diplomats have been working toward for 9 years, changes that dynamic by requiring action in some form from every country, rich and poor. Now, notice that, requiring action from every country. Here's the truth. It doesn't require anything. This agreement has no enforcement mechanism. I read the entire agreement, 31 pages. I promise you, it was like eating sawdust with no cream on it. It was a horrible thing, but I made myself go through it because I understand that they're saying that this is going to change the world. Well, if they want to change the world, I want to know what the world is going to look like when they get finished changing it, and why are they wanting to change it, and what are they intending to change it to? Okay, well, continuing on, the article states, this is truly a historic moment, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said in an interview. For the first time, we have a truly universal agreement on climate change, one of the most crucial problems on earth. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to tell you one more time, it's not a problem at all. Climate change is no problem. Global warming is no problem. It was warmer 1,000 years ago than it is right now. The Vikings sailed through the northern straits 1,000 years ago. You can't do it today. It was warmer then than it is now. They had no SUVs. They had no jet airplanes. This is all made up. Now, well, the big things I want to tell you, first of all, what this agreement contains, and then I want to tell you why they're pushing this when it's not even a problem. They're creating a crisis in order to solve the crisis, because their solution is what they really want to foist upon you and me. Continuing on, scientists and leaders said the talks here represented the world's last best hope of striking a deal that would begin to avert the most devastating effects of a warming planet. The New Deal will not, on its own, solve global warming. At best, scientists who have analyzed it say it will cut global greenhouse gas emissions by about half. Now, that's the goal, to cut global greenhouse gas. Can that be done? Yes, it can be done. But will that stop global warming? No, it won't. They're not related, but they're claiming they're related. So it's going to stop global greenhouse gas emissions by about a half, to solve an increase in atmospheric temperatures of 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the point at which scientific studies have concluded the world will be locked into a future devastating consequences, including rising sea levels. Let's pause right there. Al Gore, in his speech in Copenhagen in 2009, said sea levels would rise 18 feet by 2030. And he quoted a particular scientist. A person went to that scientist immediately after Al Gore's speech and said, "Did you say sea levels would rise 18 feet? He laughed and shook his head. He said, "No." He said, "Maybe 18 inches in the most drastic of circumstances." But Al Gore got a little carried away, and what's a foot here or there? What if you turn inches into feet? As long as you get what you want, that's the main thing. Anyway, rising sea levels supposedly are going to flood Florida and going to make places uninhabitable. It's a crisis that we have to totally rearrange the entire world because of this crisis. So rising sea levels, severe droughts, and flooding. Whoa, stop right there. I looked at this and I said, wait, it's going to cause droughts? And it's going to cause flooding? Really? So this climate change is going to cause droughts and flooding all at the same time? Then it went on to say widespread food and water. I mean, they say sea levels are going to rise, but now they say there's going to be droughts. Widespread food and water shortages and more destructive storms. At the same time, the deal could be viewed as a signal to global financial energy markets, triggering a fundamental shift away from the investment in coal, oil, and gas as primary energy sources towards zero carbon energy sources like wind, solar, and nuclear power. Now, here's where it all comes down. They're promoting these unpolluting energy sources. Get away from gas, oil, and coal, because they're going to cause the world to warm, and that's going to cause the sea caps to melt, and that's going to cause the oceans to rise, and it's going to wreak all kinds of havoc, and the world may in fact become uninhabitable. I mean, this is how far these radicals go. These are radicals, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to make the world uninhabitable. But yet we have already proven that the world was warmer 1,000 years ago than it is right now. And we went through a warming period back in 1930, 1935. And then we went through a mini ice age in 1975, because climate always fluctuates. It's part of God's way of building things. Nevertheless, the world finally has a framework for cooperating on climate change that's suited to the task, said Mark Levy, an expert on energy and climate change policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. Pause. You maybe should know that the Council on Foreign Relations is an avid promoter of one world government. They believe the answer to the problems of the world is one world government. And so they have a director on their council that is devoting himself to promoting the policies of climate change. Now, whether or not this becomes a true turning point for the world, though, depends critically on how seriously countries follow through. Just 5 years ago, such a deal seemed politically impossible. A similar 2009 climate change summit meeting in Copenhagen collapsed in acrimonious failure after countries could not unite around a deal. The changes that led to the Paris Accord came about through a mix of factors, particularly major shifts in the domestic politics and bilateral relationships of China and the United States, the world's two largest greenhouse gas polluters. While scientists once warned that climate change was a problem for future generations, recent scientific reports have concluded that it has started to wreak havoc now, from flooding in Miami to droughts. Now, why the droughts? What does global warming have to do with it's causing flooding and it's causing droughts? Those are polar opposites. And water shortages in China. Okay, so global warming is causing both flooding and water shortages. You talk about having your cake and eating it too. That's what they're trying to say. And of course, we're supposed to all nod our heads and say 97% of all the scientists say this is true, because President Obama has said it 1,547 times over and over and over, and NPR pirates, polyparrots and CNN, and on and on and on and on we go. And they're trying to brainwash all of us into saying that 97% of the scientists agree. But I read this little petition where 32,000 scientists said they don't agree. Well, anyway, negotiators from many countries have said that a crucial moment in the path to the Paris Accord came last year in the United States, when Mr. Obama enacted the nation's first climate change policy, a set of stringent new Environmental Protection Agency regulations designed to slash greenhouse gas pollution from the nation's coal-fired power plants. Now, let's stop right there. You heard about our new climate change policy, did you? Remember when Congress passed it and then President Obama signed it? You don't remember? Why don't you remember? I'll tell you why. It didn't happen. He enacted it dictatorially. He knew he could not get his program through the House or the Senate. And so he did it by executive order through the Environmental Protection Agency. And he has enacted such stringent policies that most of our coal-fired power plants are now being driven out of business. Well, anyway, meanwhile in China, the growing internal criticism over air pollution from coal-fired power plants led President Xi Jinping to pursue domestic policies to cut coal use. Now, they've got a lot of smog there. It's not the same thing as global warming, but it's smog because they have so many of these coal-fired plants. And so Mr. Z is moving to clean that up at the same time that President Obama is enacting all of these policies for the EPA. Now, in November of 2014 in Beijing, Mr. Obama and Mr. Z announced that they would jointly pursue plans to cut domestic greenhouse gas emissions. That breakthrough announcement was seen as paving the way to the Paris deal, in which nearly all the world's nations have jointly announced similar plans. Now, the final language did not fully satisfy everyone. Representatives of some developing nations expressed consternation. Poorer countries had pushed for a legally binding provision requiring that rich countries appropriate a minimum of at least $100 billion a year to help them mitigate and adapt to the ravages of climate change. Okay, now here's the real kicker. In the final deal, that $100 billion figure appears only to be in the preamble, not in the legally binding portion of the agreement. Now, one big question we have is, what is the legally binding portion of the agreement? Why do we even have this? Why is it happening? What is really going on here? Well, what's happening, in fact, is in this agreement, it's not legally binding because it's all being done on a voluntary basis. Nevertheless, they've tried to build it in. And the whole reason that it's not legally binding is because President Obama knows he cannot put it through the Senate. And if it's legally binding, it's going to be a treaty that has to be ratified by the Senate. He knows that it's impossible to get it through. Consequently, he is doing all of this by dictatorial declaration. And yet he's promising things, hoping to build up enough momentum that he'll be able to force the succeeding government, which he hopes will be headed by Hillary Clinton, to carry on this climate change. Well, let's go back to our article. Despite the historic nature of the Paris Climate Accord, its success still depends heavily on two factors outside the parameter of the deal. One, global peer pressure. Two, the actions of future governments. Now, in other words, nobody is being assigned a target. They're going to set their own targets, but they're counting on peer pressure for all the governments. And furthermore, all of your undeveloped countries want part of that $100 billion a year that the developed countries are going to ante up for. So they're going to want that money, and if they don't set their targets where Obama and company feel they should, then they just won't get their allotment of the free money, which is designed to help them to move from a carbon-rich economy to a carbon-reduced economy, hopefully a carbon-free economy. They're hoping that all of their new resources for electricity will be solar, wind, and whatever else. Okay, now ahead of the Paris talks, governments, and let's continue on here, Governments of the 186 nations put forth public plans detailing how they would cut carbon emissions through 2025 or 2030. Those plans alone, once enacted, will cut emissions by half the levels required to stave off the worst effects of global warming. The national plans vary vastly in scope and ambition. While every country is required to put forward a plan, there is no legal requirement dictating how much. They can say, we're going to reduce ours by 1%. Now, a lot of the developing countries say, hey, we're trying to catch up industrially with you, and you used hydrocarbons, oil and coal and all those things, gas, in order to achieve the financial success. And now you're telling us we can't use them in order to catch up with you. So you're saying that you're going to give us money so that we can invest in this clean energy so that we can also grow financially and industrially. Okay, so they have to set their goal. Now, the developing countries aren't going to have very big goals. They're going to allow them to set small goals. But it all has to be determined how much countries should cut emissions. Okay, now let's continue. Thus, the Paris Pact has built in a series of legally binding requirements. And again, that's foolery there, because there are no legally binding requirements. I read the entire document, 31 long pages. There are no legally binding requirements. But they are talking about these legally binding requirements that countries ratchet up the stringency of their climate change policies in the future. What they're going to do, they're going to set the requirements now. Then they're going to come back 5 years from now and say, okay, can we do better? How have we done? In the meantime, they're going to have a system of reporting that's going to be published on the UN webpage in order to pressure people to conform. So if a nation is doing very poorly, they're going to end up being looked down on by the international community, and they're going to end up being reported on all the media of the world, and consequently, that's where we're going with this. They're counting on shame and pressure. Now, I don't think that's going to work very well. However, they do have an ace in the hole. That's that $100 billion. And I wonder where that's coming from. I know some of it you're going to be paying, and I'm going to be paying, because I promise you, President Obama plans to build that into the U.S. tax system. Nevertheless, let's continue. Countries will be required to reconvene every 5 years starting in 2020. So this is 2015. They're going to reconvene in 2020 with updated plans that would tighten the emission cuts, since the cuts that they anticipate making right now are only going to do about half of the job. Then let's at least get started. That's half loaf is better than no loaf at all. So let's get started, and then we'll come back together 5 years from now, and we'll look things over, and we'll see what has to be done to make it even better. So countries will be legally required again. And again, I read the whole thing. There's nothing legally required, except they're signing this document. When they sign the document, I suppose that's what they mean by they're legally required to reconvene every 5 years starting in 2023 to publicly report on how they are doing in cutting emissions compared to their plans. Now, again, what happens if they don't? There's no basis. They can't hail them before a climate court, even though they wanted to be able to do that. Yet they dropped it because the nations simply were not going to stand still for it. So they are not establishing the climate police as they wanted to do. The only whip that I see they have is this $100 billion that they will refuse to give them their particular supposedly portion that they have coming to them, in order to apologize for all the emissions that have been produced by your industrialized nations, by your developed nations, and so consequently we have a moral obligation to help them, since we caused the pollution and now they're trying to catch up. Okay. The article goes on to say, they will be legally required to monitor and report on their emissions levels and reductions using a universal accounting system. I wonder what that system's going to be. So this is all going to be under a new massive UN bureaucracy. They're going to have this universal accounting system so we can measure everybody's carbon emissions. Okay, and if you don't do it, you now become one of the offending nations. You're now a climate denier, and therefore you're a bad person, and you also are threatening the planet. Well, you can see where this is going to go. Okay, now the hybrid legal structure was explicitly designed in response to the political reality in the United States. A deal that would have assigned legal requirements for countries to cut emissions at specific levels would need to go before the United States Senate for ratification. I'm talking to you out of the New York Times right now. They know this. The reason this whole thing was designed this way is because President Obama knew the Senate was against it and would not approve it. So he's going over the head of our elected representatives, and he's enacting legislation by fiat rather than by the due process that our Constitution calls for. The article goes on to say that language would have been dead on arrival in the Republican-controlled Senate, where many members question the established science of human-caused climate change and still more wish to thwart Mr. Obama's climate change agenda. Now notice, President Obama plans to implement this huge agreement with no congressional approval whatsoever. Now we're going to continue, and also we'll be taking your calls before the end of this program, but I want to get this information to you because I know there's a lot to it, and we're not always able to get our arms around it. Nevertheless, we'll continue the second half of the program talking about this new climate change agreement and what it's going to mean to you and your family. We'll be back. It is estimated that there were 300 million people on earth during the time of Jesus and his apostles. We have over 7 billion human beings on earth today. This means we have 23 times as many people to reach with the gospel as Jesus and his disciples had. God has given us unprecedented tools to accomplish this great commission here in these end times.
Endtime Ministries has had a great year so far, reaching an average of 220 million people per month using television, radio, internet, social media, Endtime Magazine, and Endtime Prophecy conferences.
Many of you planned for end-of-the-year giving. Please consider a special gift to Endtime in your planning. These gifts are always such a blessing to our ministry.
Partners, your wonderful generosity and support throughout this year have made this year's accomplishments possible. The tasks before us are greater than the accomplishments behind us. I have no doubt that God is going to help us experience the greatest revival the world has ever known.
So from Judy and I and the End Time staff, we would like to say to you,
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year! From the bottom of our hearts, thank you and God bless you.
End of the Age is a production of Endtime Ministries. To reach our operators, call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
Without getting too laborious, I at least want you to have some appreciation for where we are right now and what has just happened. Now, to boil it down to its essence, this agreement is going to be totally voluntary except for shame and pressure. There are no assigned quotas to any country, but yet I'm sure that behind the scenes they have said, okay, in order for all this to work, here are some guidelines for every country. The developed countries, they should do much more. The developed countries should contribute so much idealistically. And so many of the leaders of this country are like President Obama. They're very much for this. So they're going to do their very best to lead their country into this situation. I want to finish, though, because this is such an important article. I want to make sure you have a good understanding. So the individual countries' plans are voluntary, but the legal requirements that they publicly monitor, if they sign this agreement, then unless they want to violate their signature, they're going to have to publicly monitor, verify, and report what they are doing, as well as publicly put forth updated plans. And they are designed to create a name and shame system. Now, I'm reading to you from the New York Times. This whole system is a name and shame. I'm quoting, system of global peer pressure, in hopes that countries will not want to be seen as international laggards. Now, that system depends heavily on the views of the future world leaders who will carry out those policies. In the United States, every Republican candidate running for president in 2016 has publicly questioned or denied the science of climate change and has voiced opposition to Mr. Obama's climate change policies. Now, I think we should pause right here. There are several of the Republican candidates that say they're against it, but once they're in office, they probably would cooperate with it because they're that much of globalists. There are others that absolutely will not. So the next president, here's the thing you need to understand, the next president could totally trash this whole deal because it has no validity in law, in U.S. law. It's simply an action taken on his own initiative by the President of the United States. It's a total worldwide vision, voluntary, but with no teeth whatsoever. So it could all go down. And now, I'm going to say this before we go back to our articles. I do want to finish the article. It's very, very important. But I want to say this. This whole thing is designed to get us used to world government because it's sitting at the top of this big pyramid is going to be the United Nations, and they're going to be publishing on their website continually who's conforming, who's not conforming, who's doing good, who's doing bad. And I promise you, the drum beat of propaganda is just going to go on and on. You think you've heard about global warming up till now? You've heard nothing yet. Now, back to the article. In the Senate, Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader who has led the charge against Mr. Obama's climate change agenda, said before his international partners pop the champagne, they should remember that this is an unattainable deal based on domestic energy plan that is likely illegal, that half the states have sued to halt, and that Congress has already voted to reject. All right, you got to see this next article, and I'm going to move through it quick. Climate criminal blows whistle. It's just about money. This comes from WND. Secretary of State John Kerry told the Paris Climate Conference that ending all U.S. carbon emissions, or even those in all the industrialized world, would do nothing to impact the climate, leading one of the top critics of the climate change movement to call the speech additional proof that the effort is all about, are you ready for this? Wealth redistribution. Kerry said in his speech at the climate change conference that all the industrialized nations, if they eliminated all of their carbon emissions, it wouldn't make a dent in this thing. Listen as I continue. In another major development, the latest draft of the climate agreement does not include the creation of the International Climate Justice Tribunal. They wanted this so bad, but obviously somebody said, you put that in there, I'm out. So it does not include the International Climate Justice Tribunal, which would have been a UN agency that billed industrialized nations for the cleanup of natural disasters around the world. So if we have a hurricane, it's going to be the polluter's fault, right? Because carbon emissions cause climate change. So if we have a dramatic storm, a tornado or something, well, guess what's going to happen? It's going to cause $2 billion worth of damage. There's going to be a bill show up at the White House. You're responsible. Now, they didn't get that one through, but they talked about it. They already made the name for the tribunal. I mean, it's like the Nuremberg trials. Now they're going to, you say, well, they'll never do that. Oh, yes, they will. They fully intend to do that. You're just talking about the baby's just been born. Wait till this baby grows up and 6 foot tall and weighs 250 pounds. You think you're in for problems now. That's where we're headed. Okay, in Kerry's address to the conference, he made a push to get developing nations to make major commitments in reducing carbon emissions. However, his comments also gave considerable fuel to those who believe Kerry and others are on a fool's errand. The fact is that even if every single American citizen biked to work, carpooled to school, used only solar panels to power their homes, if we each planted a dozen trees, if we somehow eliminated all our domestic greenhouse gas emissions, guess what? Now these are the words of John Kerry, our Secretary of State, who was championing this agreement. He said, guess what? That still wouldn't be enough to offset the carbon pollution from the rest of the world, Kerry said. What's he doing? He's trying to shame the developed nations who say, hey, we shouldn't have to do all this. You guys caused all this carbon emission. Now you're trying to make us pay the bill for fixing it. We shouldn't have to do that. So now Kerry is saying to them, if all the industrialized nations, well, let me read it to you. This is his words. If all the industrialized nations went down to zero emissions, zero. Remember what I said, all the industrialized nations went down to zero emissions, it wouldn't be enough, not when more than 65% of the world's carbon pollution comes from the developing world, Kerry added. So he's trying to pull the whole world into this agreement. Now, I got news for Mr. Kerry. If everybody went down to zero, it still wouldn't make any difference. This world has been running for a long time without this climate change agreement, and it's going to keep right on running because there's one who controls the seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter, and that's Almighty God. And, well, we have a tough time just predicting whether it's going to rain tomorrow or not, let alone finding a way to get control of the climate and make it do what we think it should do. Well, it scares me to death when I think about President Obama now in charge of the climate, or John Kerry. I mean, look what they've done in the Middle East. I mean, refugees running everywhere, trying to get away from the mess that they created when they undermined the governments of Egypt, of Libya, of Syria. And look what a mess we've got. These guys get a hold of the weather. Heaven help us. Anyway, Christopher C. Horner is a senior fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and author of multiple books challenging the basis for the climate change movement. He is in Paris as an observer at the conference where he has been branded a climate criminal. They've got his picture up as a climate criminal in Paris. Can you believe it? Horner said Kerry accidentally lurched toward the truth in trying to implore global cooperation. What he's doing is inadvertently pointing out that this is all pain and no gain, Horner said. He won't admit to the pain. They still say that if the state uses its coercive power and forces you into energy rationing and so on, it still wouldn't impact the climate. Now, that's what Kerry's saying. Kerry used the hypothetical of zero carbon emissions, which is a far cry even from the hotly contested Obama environmental regulations. I mean, we're a long ways from that, calling for major carbon reductions by 2030. Horner said the real goals go much further and are plenty frightening. They're talking 70 to 95% reduction in this document, Horner said. They really do think that they can bring us back to the renewable age, which we left 100 years ago. Suddenly, we liberated hydrocarbon. 100 years ago, suddenly we discovered hydrocarbon, we discovered oil, gas, coal, and we didn't have to live on hydropower or solar power. Now, while going back to renewables is the stated goal of climate change activists, Horner said there's a good reason we moved away from it generations ago. We're not going back to that, he said. We left it. It was a time of much shortened lifespans, disease, drudgery, mortality, crop failures leading to catastrophe, and so on. Meanwhile, the scrapping of the International Climate Justice Tribunal marks a win on one of Horner's highest priorities since he envisioned the panel blaming the U.S. and other advanced nations for the severe weather events throughout the world. It's a charge he believes would have stuck at the tribunal because signatories at the conference will be expected to confess their responsibility for climate change in any final agreement. We're supposed to be beating our chests saying the United States shouldn't have automobiles, we shouldn't have nice homes, we shouldn't have all this industry. We need to go back and get rid of all this. But while Horner is thrilled, he said many others in Paris are not. It's clearly going to leave the Greens, the environmentalists, upset, and some countries upset because it's kicking the can down the road on a few issues, Horner said. Persistent sticking points are leading some climate change activists to call for Pope Francis to come and demand unity in advancing a climate deal. Horner said the pontiff had better be ready for a debate. He's going to couch this in terms of social justice, and as I have mentioned to you, that is truly perverse. He said, I'm not saying the Pope knows this, but social justice as they see it is killing tens of thousands of the most vulnerable in every country. Horner said the explanation for that charge is simple. Implementing emissions reductions places major costs on energy providers, which pass the cost on to consumers. Soaring utility rates will then impact the poor most negatively. And European nations that already do this see people having to choose between buying food and paying to heat or cool their homes. As for the logistics of the conference and any forthcoming agreement, Horner said officials are twisting themselves in legal knots to avoid this being a treaty since they know Congress won't approve it. The buzz here in Paris is that the U.S. Congress is the greatest obstacle to them obtaining the treaty that they refuse to call a treaty. Horner said that means the democratic process. Okay, we're going to pause right there. We're up against another break. Hey, by the way, if you're not yet a partner with Endtime Ministries, critical things ahead. Become a partner today. Call us, 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
We here at Endtime are excited about the 7 seals. The 7 sales of the season. Endtime Ministries has 7 great Christmas gift ideas full of meaning and truth for your loved ones to open on Christmas Day. On Wednesday, December 16th, get 10% off Understanding the End Time. This series is designed to explain the prophecies of the end time in easy-to-understand terms. It will equip you in the exciting year ahead with all God has planned as He unfolds the pages of Bible prophecy. Oh, and by the way, this series covers the 7 seals too. Get it on the last day of the 7 sales of the season, and have a Merry Christmas.
As people are gathering for Christmas parties this time of year, have you thought of gathering your friends and family to give them the gifts of an end-time Bible study? The Understanding the End Time 14-lesson series is designed to explain end-time prophecies in an easy-to-understand format. End Time has over 200 Bible studies in progress. You can host one too and be a blessing to others, not just this holiday season, but all year long. Call 1-800-END-TIME and order the Understanding the End Time series with the accompanying workbook, or go to endtime.com and under Events, click the Bible Studies link. Study God's Word with the people you love most, or maybe someone who doesn't have any place to go. Make some hot chocolate and have the best Christmas gathering this holiday season.
Concluding an article, then immediately after this, we're coming to the phones. There's nothing democratic about this. If you allow Congress to get a crack at this, it's over, Mr. Horner says. Under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, this would never fly. No free society would ever do to itself what they're demanding of us, he said. Horner is one of 7 activists opposed to any deal to have their face plastered around Paris on posters branding them climate criminals. After first joking that activists could have picked a better picture of him, Horner said, there is a message of intimidation involved with the posters. It's getting a little long in the tooth, putting up all the bad guys' pictures so everybody knows what they look like, Horner said. If we can play the what if Sarah Palin did it game, if you want, but they really want everybody here to know what we look like. In the end, Horner said, the activist definition of climate criminal is really an indictment on those working to preserve freedom. We point out the policy's history, that it won't affect the climate, that it's about a wealth transfer, wealth redistribution, international socialism, that's what it's all about. Bernie Sanders would love it. That it will kill the most vulnerable, that it's a gesture about clearly what they're openly acknowledging here, to redesign the global economic system, he said. That's what this is all about, ladies and gentlemen. When you point those things out because they aren't popular in the United States, you're a criminal. That's what he's saying. Well, I've got a little bit of time left. We're coming to the phones now. The number to call to be on the air with me, 877-END-TIME. I know I've been going fast and furious this entire program. Nevertheless, I wanted to at least give you enough information because the average person doesn't have the time to wade through all of these things. So I wanted to make sure that you at least have some concept of what's happened. This agreement is passed, and President Obama is going to try to implement it as far and as fast as he can. Now, we don't have the money. Somebody told me he took a $3 billion check with him to the meeting. I don't know whether he did that or not. But we don't have $1 billion. We don't have any money. We are $19 trillion in debt right now, maybe 20 by now. They've been escalating this debt so fast. But of course, he's leaving office. When he walks out, he won't owe a penny. He'll leave that in the next guy's lap. That's what's going to happen right now. He has doubled our national debt in 7 short years. Astounding. Took from 1776 until 7 years ago to create, what, $10 trillion worth of debt, which was way too much. And in 7 years, President Obama doubled it. Doubled it. I mean, if you did that with your finances, you'd be in jail right now. Every banker in town would be after you. They would repossess your home, your car. They would probably get you for some kind of fraud. I don't know what all. Now, again, I don't want to be irresponsible here. I'm just simply trying to dramatize this so we will have some kind of an appreciation that right now President Obama is planning on spending on this climate change agreement like there's no tomorrow, because this was his number one goal of his presidency. His number one goal then is to convert the world to a world socialist republic, to a one world governmental system under UN control, and almost all the nations of the world in the UN are socialists now, almost all of them are. So the dream of Karl Marx were just that far away. What could really mess it up, though, is if our next president slammed on the brakes, put it in reverse, turned around, did a total U-turn and said, sorry, we're out. We're not going there. We're not going to have any part of this. It's all a fraud. It's all phony. Sorry. Now, that probably wouldn't save the world, but it would undoubtedly save the United States of America. And I have reason to believe that that's going to happen. I don't know how the United States is going to be saved, but here's what I do know. I can prove to you in the Bible what's going to happen to the United States. We have a brand new DVD called America's God-Given Destiny. Some people think it's the best we've ever done. Now, I'm getting ready to make an unprecedented offer to you right now. We're wanting to use this money to save the Jewish people. So, for anyone who would donate $1,000 to another Jewish Holocaust fund, we're going to send you three things. We're going to send you a copy of this DVD. And on this DVD is a beautiful song written by Allison Huntley that you will love. And it's entitled America's God-Given Destiny. In addition to that, you're going to get a letter that you can sign, which will be then given to the Jewish person that you help make it to Israel with your signature on it. And then you're also going to have a beautiful piece of art that we have prepared. Now, that's for all people who donate $1,000. For $500, you get the physical DVD. Now, here's where all the rest of you come in. Because you may not be able to afford $1,000, you may not be able to afford $500. Now, those are good causes. We need to get 1.6 million Jews out of Europe ASAP, as quickly as we can. But many of you may not be able to do that. But I don't want you to miss this DVD. Now, here's what we're doing. For a donation of any size, we're going to give you a password so you can download the DVD digitally. For a donation of any size, no matter what size it is, we're going to give you that. So I urge you right now to participate in that. I'd like for this to become a mass movement because everybody on this planet needs to see America's God-given destiny. Not only does it talk about where America is in the Bible, it talks about the future of America. How will we conduct ourselves during the coming one world government? Will we be a part of it? Will we be out? Will we be an enemy to the Antichrist? Will we be a friend? What's going to happen? It's in the Bible. And this is the first time we've ever published this. It seems like God made it so crystal clear to me, and I put it in this DVD. So anyway, that's available to you. So I want to repeat it one more time. For a $1,000 gift, you're going to get a letter addressed to a Jewish friend. With you sign it and send it back to us. We're going to then send it to the Jewish agency in Israel. They've already committed to hand it to the person that your money goes to help, number one, which is a wonderful thing. Number two, you're going to receive the physical DVD with Allison Huntley's song on it, so you'll own it. It'll be yours. And by the way, Allison donated this to Endtime Ministries because she is a lover of Endtime Ministries. And then you also get a piece of artwork which shows the American eagle defending Israel in the end times. It's a lovely piece of art. I think you'll love it. Anyway, you're going to get those three things if you donate $1,000 to the Another Jewish Holocaust Fund. If you do $500, you're going to get the physical DVD. But if you do any amount, you're going to get a password so you can download the DVD together with Allison's song. So it's going to be a wonderful thing. We want this thing to go viral worldwide because we live in such a critical time right now. Okay, well, I've talked too long, and therefore I have time for one call, but Jennifer's on the phone right now, calling from Indiana. Hello, Jennifer. Jennifer, are you with me?
I am.
What's on your mind today?
I have a question. I was wondering who the daughter of Babylon is in Zechariah 2.
I don't recall exactly how it's phrased in Zechariah 2, but I can tell you for certain that Babylon, Mystery Babylon in Revelation 17 is the Roman church, and the mother Babylon has daughters. Verse 5 of chapter 17 says, on her forehead is a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. She has daughter harlots. And this is referring to all of the Catholics and the Protestants that are going to join together in false Christianity to follow the false prophet into the arms of the Antichrist during the Great Tribulation. Now, before you turn that radio off, all of you out there, let me tell you this. There's a lot of good people in the Catholic Church and in the Protestant churches that are going to realize what's happening. It's happening right now. You already probably have realized it. And they're going to come out because Revelation 18:4 says, come out of her, my people, that you be not partaker of her sins and receive not of her plagues. So when it talks about the daughter of Babylon, I don't want to answer definitively about Zechariah 2 because it's been a while since I read that passage. But I will tell you, though, and this is a very important answer, and that is in Revelation 17. The whole chapter is devoted to the judgment of Mystery Babylon and all of her daughters. And actually, we have a DVD called True Christianity versus False Christianity. And I want to tell everybody about it right now, because I think every person on the planet needs to go through that DVD right now. It's available. Just ask for now I will warn you though, it's strong meat. If you don't love the truth, don't get it, because you'll be mad at me. And I don't want to make you mad at me. But if you love the truth and want to know the difference between true Christianity and false Christianity, when most of Christianity, according to the prophecies of the Bible, is going to go sweeping straight into the arms of the Antichrist, how do you know to stay out? How will you be able to tell true Christianity versus false Christianity? Jesus said in Matthew 24, in the last days, many will come in my name and shall deceive many. Many people are going to come under the name of Christ, under the name of Christianity. But the business is going to be deception. Well, if ever we needed truth preaching the whole Bible without fudging on it, without bending anything, but being very honest and open and transparent, we need it right now. So anyway, that DVD will help you. True Christianity versus false Christianity. It's part of our salvation package, and I would really recommend you get the whole thing. But nevertheless, the salvation package has 4 DVDs. The True Christianity versus False Christianity is the second in that package. So get the whole package, you'll get the whole thing, which I think everyone should have. But in case you don't want to do that, at least get True Christianity versus False Christianity. Jennifer, sorry I left you on such a short leash of time here, but nevertheless, you gave me a wonderful chance to tell everybody something that all of us really do need to know. Okay, the last thing I want to say to you as we're running out of time, if you're not yet a partner with Endtime Ministries, what a good New Year's resolution that would be. Some of you've been thinking about it. We need you, because we need to accelerate dramatically. I mean, Endtime Ministries needs to double and double again. This last year, per month, we're reaching about 220 million people, which is wonderful. We're so grateful. But we need to reach the whole world, and that's our goal. So join with us, join hands with us, donate to another Jewish Holocaust Fund to help the Jews get to Israel before it's too late. Also, become a partner with Endtime Ministries. And in order to do that, just pick up the phone and call us right now. The number to call is 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Just tell them you want to be a partner, and I'll start sending you my monthly partner letter telling you what's going on inside the ministry, so you will truly be a partner. So join hands with me. The number to call one more time, 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. What a day we live in. To all of you that are already partners, thank you. Thank you so very much. I cannot thank you enough. God bless each of you. We'll be right back here this time tomorrow.
End of the Age is a production of Endtime Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.